Hello, my name is Fawnia Schultz, and I'm a staff developer with Pinellas County Schools and a SIM content enhancement professional developer. And today I'm here to kind of walk you through my thought process on how I unpack a unit and how I plan for a unit using content enhancement routines. And the example I'm going to show you today is for a biology course. So kind of here on this screen, you'll see here are my outcomes. I'm hoping that by the end of my little video here that you will see how I use the Smarter Instructional Sequence Cycle to identify big ideas and critical content by unpacking standards, how I then use that critical content and big ideas to map it out on the unit organizer. Once my unit organizer is drafted, I will analyze for learning difficulties. So I will use that unit organizer to kind of anticipate where some struggles are going to be and maybe identify some of the information that I couldn't put on that unit organizer and needs to go elsewhere in my lesson planning. And then reach enhancement decisions. Which routines can I then use to help support student learning in addition to the unit organizer? All right, so here we go. Let's go for a journey in my thought process in developing a unit. So the other day in the Institute, you guys worked to draft your course organizer. So here's a sample of what my biology course organizer looks like. On the back of the course organizer are the units. Some districts will paste out these units for you, and some of you guys may have had to determine on your own. Today we're going to be focusing on the cell biology unit. So in my district, we provide a district pacing guide. And on this pacing guide is where we can clearly identify what some of those subbubbles or topics are going to be for the unit. So like I said, the unit is cell biology. The two topics in this unit are cell structures and cell cycle. So it's pretty easy for me to draft my unit organizer with this. I can take the two topics and put them in my subbubbles. So in my unit organizer, on the back in my extended unit map, are only going to have two subbubbles, cell structures and cell cycle. You will notice my is about bubble is blank. I personally like to wait until my entire extended unit map is drafted before I construct my is about bubble, but that's just my personal preference. From here, I'm actually going to go back. I'm going to look at my major standard or my parent standard, and I'm going to unpack it because this is the most important one for my students to really grasp. And in this case, it is L14.3, which is comparing and contrasting prokaryotic, eukaryotic plant and animal cells. So what we're going to do is I'm going to unpack that standard so I can identify the critical content that must go on the unit organizer. My tip is, once you get your standard here, is to underline all the nouns. So in this standard, the very important nouns are the structures, right? And which structures? Well, those of plant and animal cells and the structures of prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. My next tip is then to highlight or circle all the verbs. So what do I need students to do? Well, they need to be able to compare and contrast these structures, and then you'd be able to compare and contrast those of the prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So looking at this standard, it doesn't give me all the information I need. I know I need the students to be able to compare and contrast structures, but which ones? There are a lot of cellular structures. So the state has given us some guidelines in the content limits, and they have listed out which specific structures the students need to be able to recognize in a prokaryotic cell. You can see they're listed here, and those found in a eukaryotic cell, and you can see they're listed here. So this is some critical information I need to think about when drafting my unit. So now I take this information and I can put it into my duck form. So if I duck or I unpack my standard, the first question I need to ask myself is what the students need to do. What are the skills? And if we go back, remember, we wanted them to compare and contrast, right? So if I look here, the thing they need to do is compare and contrast. So if I slide this box off, what they need to do is compare and contrast plant and animal cells and compare and contrast prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. What the students need to understand, what is the big idea here? What is the big takeaway or the large concept? So I have down identifying the presence or absence of specific structures found within a cell. Will help identify the cell as prokaryotic, eukaryotic, plant, or animal cells. And from those content limits, I was able to determine what they need to know, all the key facts, right? And so here I just copied and pasted in what the content limits are. What are the specific structures they need to know for each of those two major types of cells? So now I can take this information and I can apply that to my unit organizer. So notice I've grayed out some boxes because I just want to focus on the one standard we just unpacked. So from my duck form, I already knew that cell structures was my subbubble, but from the duck form, I know that they need to compare and contrast. So when setting up my boxes, I wanted to keep them parallel so that they could clearly kind of visually compare and contrast prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Underneath each of them, I put the key nouns or structures they need to know for each of these types of cells. They also need to be able to compare plant and animal cells. Plant and animal cells are a type of eukaryotic cell. So I had it come branching off the side here. And you can see visually I've set it up so that they are able to be parallel and they can compare and contrast these two. So that is how my mental thought process goes when I unpack a standard and how I try to draft it on the back of a unit organizer. From there, my next step is then to create my unit test questions. So from here, if I look at just this chunk, a really great question I might ask the kids then is to be able to compare and contrast the structures found in prokaryotic, eukaryotic, plant, and animal cells, very similar to the standard. Now, I am not done yet with this topic. I've only addressed this first standard. The next standard is L14-2, where the students have to relate the structure to the function. If I go back to my unit organizer, I know that there's no way I can put all that information on here, right? I cannot possibly on this unit organizer put all the functions for each of these structures. So at this point, I make a decision. I look at data. So I know there are specific structures that are commonly assessed, and I also know some specific structures that students usually struggle with. From there, I have taken those structures and I've decided that there is a different content enhancement routine that I'm going to use to help the students learn about the specific functions of those specific structures. That routine is called the framing routine. You can see in the framing routine, what I've done is I've put in 8 different structures that I know are commonly assessed and or kids struggle with. And the way it's set up is that it can list the structure for each, the function, and then which type of cell it's found in. If you're interested in learning more about this routine, there will be an opportunity for you to learn about it more on day 4. Next, I go back to my unit organizer and I analyze for learning difficulties again. So now I'm looking here and I know that students often struggle with comparing and contrasting the prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, in addition, the plant and animal cells. Knowing that, I then decide to use another content enhancement routine called the concept comparison routine. So I've drafted 2 different concept comparison routines. In this comparison table, you'll see that I am comparing a prokaryotic and eukaryotic cell, where I help the students break down all the characteristics, those that are alike and not alike, and then draft a summary. I've done the same thing for plant and animal cells as well. If you're interested in learning more about the concept comparison routine, you will have the opportunity to learn about it more on day 4. And last, you will notice I didn't even get to the second topic or some of these benchmarks here or standards here at the bottom. But here's what it looks like when I have fully unpacked and identified the critical content that needs to go onto the back of my unit organizer. Noting I do not have everything in, I do not have all the phases of mitosis and meiosis. I will use different content enhancement routines to address those concepts. But I wanted to give you a sneak peek of what it looks like when it's completed. And you'll notice in the end, after I'm done drafting, I have then included my is about bubble. So in the end, I hope I've been able to show you how I identify big ideas and critical content when I unpack a standard, how I put those critical content and big ideas onto the unit organizer, how I analyze for learning difficulties, and then reach enhancement decisions to support my students' learning. So thank you very much, and I hope that as this has made things a little bit more clear for you in terms of using the smarter instructional sequence to design your units. Thank you.